All right, so this is session number 30. I was telling André that I'm quite surprised why you guys are still here and why I'm still hosting the Innovation Cafe, because I wasn't planning to have so many sessions. In the effort to put this thing up in the air is quite hard, let me say, but it's really exciting because I learn. I think I'm helping you guys to get to know each other as well. I think we have a community here, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for coming once again. If it is the first time, once again, welcome, hello. This is informal. Usually we have a 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes presentation, and then Q&A. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So feel free to ask anything. Don't worry, even if it is a crazy idea. That's the whole thing of the Innovation Cafe. We walk into this space and we share, we ask, because we are here to learn. And today we are going to talk about BlackBerry, which is quite famous case study of innovation, or how to fail. But I'm not going to talk more about that. But I'm curious because precisely 1 year ago, I went to an event hosted by Adobe in London. And there was an executive from BlackBerry there telling his perspective about what failed. And one thing is studying a case study. Another thing is having the executive there telling you in the face what went wrong. So I'm keen to understand André's perspective. And André, by the way, is one of the rock stars I know, one of my friends. We are both from Lisbon. That's why my background today is Lisbon. So I'm even more excited to have someone like André here today. But over to you, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hugo. Just to make sure that you guys can see my presentation. Yeah, we're good. All right, great. So, okay, so first of all, thanks Hugo for inviting me, for having this opportunity to address the Innovation Cafe. I think it was a group of people that was missing a good conversation, and this is really what it is. And this is just a few slides for us then to have a conversation about what happened, what's your experience, what's your take on that, and really to take it from there. So the role of innovation in the rise of and fall of tech giants, the BlackBerry case. So which company had a market cap of $70 billion in 2011 and lost 90% of its market value in just 1 year to never recover? So if you're saying BlackBerry, you're right, right? So BlackBerry had this incredible stock price and journey from 2002, the early 2000s, until 2011, and then it simply started to lose value and never recover. So this little bump here that took more or less 10 years. So congratulations, BlackBerry. You've been gnomed, and you've joined the ranks of companies like Kodak and Blockbuster. And that's me. This is André. This presentation is going to be obviously by me. I'm the co-founder of BlackBerry and Productized, which is a product managers conference here in Lisbon this year, broadcast from Lisbon. So it's going to be online. And I've started doing product management for apps and products back in the iPhone and Nokia's. And since then, I've been mentoring founders at leading companies and accelerators, and teaching entrepreneurship, product management at local universities here in Lisbon and Madrid. So whoever had a BlackBerry, and I just want to see, you can use emojis to vote. So yep, like this, or not me, boomer. But because I think we're lots of boomers and millennials in the room, I guess we'll see lots of yaps. Okay, so lots of yaps, lots of people had a BlackBerry and know the experience it was. So BlackBerry was a Canadian company, and it's still a Canadian company. Actually, the company still exists, but it didn't start as BlackBerry. It started as Research in Motion. It was founded by Mike Lazaridis, founder and also CTO of the company, eventually joined by Jim Balsillie, the CEO. And it was really Mike that had this amazing idea to bring email to mobile communicators. So in 1996, they launched their first email communicator, the RIM 850. And in 2003, Research in Motion launched their best-selling BlackBerry 6210. And the early 2000s until late 2000s were the crackberry years. Even Mr. President Barack Obama had his BlackBerry taken away by the Secret Services because it was deemed not American enough for a U.S. president to have and hold his phone, not being an American phone. Times they were different, of course, and something really, really gloomy was about to happen to BlackBerry. Steve Jobs announced the iPhone in 2007. And in the beginning, both Mike and Jim, they laughed at the iPhone. They said, this is a toy phone. This is not really a smartphone. This is just a piece of shit. Nobody will care about a phone without keyboard. The email experience was substandard compared to the BlackBerry. It had lots of limitations, lots of faults, and they didn't realize that what was the novelty, what was really this iPhone coming in. But as you've seen, they were disrupted. So eventually they realized that, and the classical case for disruption here is what should they do? So did they launch a touchscreen phone as well? Did they open the BlackBerry messaging service to other companies? Did they buy a tech company with a modern operating system to compete with iOS? Did they launch a tablet to compete tete-a-tete with the iPad? What do you think? What did they do? Any comments here?
They had a touchscreen phone at one point, didn't they? But that must have been a little bit later. I don't think that was their first move.
Yeah, actually, they did, and they actually launched it in 2008, right? So they strike back.
Okay.
Yeah, the Storm was launched in 2008, and the thing is, the BlackBerry curve, it just didn't happen. It was like the iPhone, and then suddenly everything's gone. No, the BlackBerry curve was still the most successful smartphone in 2009 worldwide. So it took some time, and they were answering back. So they did. The thing is, if you look about mobile networks, killer apps, and you think about the first generation being, voice, second generation mobile being text messaging, third generation being mostly about email, and third generation or fourth generation, the apps and so on. This is 2008. This was the launch of the. So I'm just going to use maybe here some. The launch of the. Let's see if I can use my spotlight. Yeah, great. So this is really the launch of the App Store in Apple, 2008, and then you had 5 years. It took BlackBerry 5 years, since 2008 until 2012, to answer back with the BlackBerry 10, which was arguably the first modern operating system of the BlackBerry. So what they did was they bought QNX, which was a pretty advanced operating systems company in the US, and they ported QNX to the BlackBerry, and BlackBerry 10 was a totally different new operating system, multitasking, more modern. So what you see here is that their stock price was actually a perfect proxy of one product, that one product here being email. So by the time boomers and Gen X were not caring about emails so much, and millennials, they came to the marketplace, and eventually Generation Z. Uh, you know, the next killer app was not being provided by BlackBerry. So, in the words of Marty Kagan, they stopped innovating on their clients' behalf. The thing is, if you were a product manager at BlackBerry in 2008, and you asked their customer base, and I guess you guys that you had their BlackBerries, they were perfectly happy with their email and chat services. You know, that service was the best in class. And even if you compare it to nowadays email experience, you could say that even back then it could probably have a better email experience than today in lots of aspects. So in my perspective, I think agility is also about sensing and responding to latent customer demands. And the product culture inside BlackBerry, they needed the top management to lead and preventing, and they were essentially preventing BlackBerry to answer in due time to market shifts for reasons that have a lot to do what Clayton Christensen famously quotes, that companies fail for the same reason that they got to be successful in the first place. They were so addicted to email, they couldn't really see that other killer apps were going to take email or make it not so relevant as it had been for the last 10 years or so. So this kind of product or company postmortems, in my perspective, they're important. If you think about the Romans, they learn from their disastrous defeat in the Cana battle in the Second Punic Wars. They then became the dominant empire in Europe. China, they commissioned studies to understand the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the communist model, to not make the same mistakes in their economic development model. And arguably they haven't done the same. So, and Steve Jobs also learned from his personal failure at Next to command a comeback to Apple that will make it the leading tech company in the world. So I really recommend a book that served me as inspiration to this, to the slides. Losing the Signal. It was written by Sean Silcoff and Jackie McNeish. It's the untold story behind the extraordinary rise and spectacular fall of BlackBerry. It tells all the details. They had access to dozens of people, including Jim Vasili and the founders of BlackBerry, and they really tell some of the reasons why the company was really not able to answer back. The good news is don't buy the book, but you can come to Productized conference this year. Sean Silcoff is one of the confirmed speakers, is going to be with us. And if you scan this QR code with your phone, you'll be able to land on a free pass, which you can then register to get the online ticket for the conference on November 26th and November 29th. In this case, this is a one day free pass for November 27th. I can come back if you then want to scan the code later. So some discussion that we can go to is, well, first of all, why did it happen? So I'd love to understand some of the reasons that were pointed by the executive that Google spoke to at the Adobe conference, but also, and now taking it out of the BlackBerry case, which sectors do you think are most prone to be disrupted? And if you just think about the automakers, which by itself will be a discussion, which ones will survive Generation Z and mass habits in electrification? Which kind of products or companies do you remember to have successful products for many decades that haven't been disrupted, or at least successfully? And which tech giants do you believe are most prone to be disrupted, and what do you think they're doing to protect themselves from being gnomed? So Hugo, this is my 17-minute presentation, and now it's really up to you to make this an engaging conversation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, André. Obrigado. Very good, as usual. So guys, don't be shy. Feel free to unmute and start the discussion. I think Ben is taking notes, so we don't need to worry about that. He usually shares.
I will.
Eloy.
I'll start with a pointer. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So my point is that André, you mentioned that the founders, they were not blindsided. They saw it coming. They decided not to act. Right. It's always like that. It's the same thing. It was the same thing with Kodak. They saw the digital cameras coming. They had time to prepare, and they decided not to. So, do you think that lack of vision from the top leadership is one of the most important factors?
So when reading this book by Sean Silkoff, one of the things that you realize that they actually knew very well the theory of Professor Clayton Christensen, right? So they had the book, of course, they were reading the book. It's not like these guys were totally clueless. Oh, what's happening? Oh, we're being disrupted. One of the things that I think always happens is in insight, everything is very obvious, right? But if you are, taking you back to this Battle of Cannae, right, or anything, if you are inside theater of operations, even if you are a general, but if you are too close to your troops, you're encircled, you cannot have this eagle-eye vision and understand really what's going on. So inside the company, that happens a lot. It's really hard to understand that the market dynamics were changing. So one of the things that you read from the book, Eloy, is that Mike Lazaridis, so the Research in Motion, keep this in mind. Research in Motion was founded in the same year of Adobe, actually, 1982 or 1981. And the first 15 years of BlackBerry, they had very little success. They were selling IoT devices, modems, they were really not making any dent in the universe. They didn't have any successful flagship product. Then Mike Lazaridis, he realized, oh, wait a minute, mobile networks. So they were having some contracts for mobile networks to do pagers and stuff like that, but they were essentially commodity products. And Mike, he understood, wait a minute, we can use this data networks, and this were the early 90s, and we can build a email server. This email server will translate emails into a very low bandwidth friendly manner so that people with small pagers, they can still read their emails and they can communicate back. They can have this very simple QWERTY keywords, and they can say, okay, I got your message and whatever. And this was a pretty radical approach because it allowed for effective email communication on the move. And they got addicted to this low bandwidth scenario for a long time. So when 3G came and suddenly low bandwidth was not a question anymore, I think they didn't realize that this was opening a new window of opportunity. The same way that 5G is coming now, and we still don't know what is going to be the killer app of 5G. Is it TikTok, really? Maybe, who knows? If it is, then it is, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's automated cars. Maybe it's, the fourth industrial revolution. Lots of people have their different opinion, but I guess no one can tell for sure even whether 5G is something we really going to need. Lots of people say, oh, it's just 4G on asteroids, bigger bandwidth, and then what's up? So it's really hard to know. That's why they were not really understanding the tectonic shifts that were happening in the industry, and one of the things that in insight is easy to understand is that they didn't have a proper operating system. So the BlackBerry operating system was poorly designed, and it was a legacy operating system. And in lots of aspects, it's almost funny, but the same thing happened with Apple in the 1990s, right? So what Steve Jobs went back to Apple, what he brought along was the next operating system. The next operating system ended up being ported to the Mac, and then the rest is history. But the existing Mac OS was essentially not going anywhere, right?
Yeah,
Well,
it's a fair comment, but indeed, you never know what's going to happen. But I believe that's you know better than me with productized and with product design. You're much more experienced, but that's the time when you go to your customers and understand and try to understand what they want next, right? Because you're right. What Steve Jobs did for Apple was he brought usability into the equation, right? So things became much more natural for the human being. But that was not just an idea. That was a lot of research, user research, client research. And I believe that was lacking in not only the BlackBerry example, but the Kodak example. They had a whole research lab that was, and one guy that came with a report. Hey, we've been looking at the market, and Sony's bringing this amazing device. Of course, it looked like a toaster oven in the beginning, but still, digital cameras were the thing. But they started going to the customer, going to the market. I believe 5G will bring us IoT to the masses.
They did. I think they did. I'm not trying to be defensive here regarding what they did or did not, but they did. If they were asking their customer base, which were essentially executives back in 2008, 2009, even after the iPhone launch, it was making no difference. People were saying, BlackBerry, you have the best product in the world. Why should I want an iPhone? So they were very, their existing customer base was very happy with the BlackBerry experience. They didn't, there was only latent this answer to it. So what I think obviously happened is that as millennials, they came to the job market and they started buying iPhones, and suddenly they had the marketplace of apps in place. By the time they realized, oh my God, we need a marketplace, and it's not just about email, it's about Uber, it's about all these new apps that were coming up and really made the difference for the iPhone and Android. Then when they realized, it was already too late, because when they realized that they had to get developers on board, they didn't have an operating system that allowed developers to develop for the BlackBerry the same way that it did for Android and the iPhone. And when they finally did in 2012, 2013, developers were all in this duopoly called Android iOS, which still subsists today. And by the way, of course, nobody is even talking about Microsoft. They were also defranchised from business for more or less the same reason.
Yeah, you're right. You're completely right. Indeed, their OS was really poor, to say it lightly. And I lived that change in which some executives were fighting to keep their BlackBerries, and some of them were riding the new wave, and there was that duality in the air. I lived that, and we had to subsist in both environments.
You had to be a early adopter to go to a board meeting and having an iPhone, and everyone else had a BlackBerry, and people look at you, it's like, what's wrong with you? You don't belong here.
True.
That's exactly when innovation is happening, right? When people tell you we don't belong here, then you should take note. Well, maybe
no, you're right. But they were so strong, and they moved so consistently that they really drove BlackBerry out of the scenario, right? Because the first challenge for iPhone for business was security. It wasn't a secure environment for corporate email. And after that battle was won, it was all the way to the top. Bad product strategy, I would say, from the top management in that case.
There's a question here. Are we sure customers know what they want?
That's why I turned my camera on. That's exactly what I was going to come at it with as well. Nice one, Smriti. But I think there's there's like a level or a question around like innovation and product. Hi, I'm Kathleen. By the way, I've not been here before. This is very cool. Thanks for inviting me, Andre. This is awesome. But what I wanted to weigh in on, and I'm also in Lisbon, by the way, just for context. But as you can tell, I'm not Portuguese. But with the innovation question, I think that like with what happened with Apple, it was so like, it wasn't even out of left field because the field didn't exist in which Apple was conceived, right? It's like there was nothing that like preset that direction. And I think for BlackBerry there, and I never had a BlackBerry, I'm a little bit young for that, but I have heard studies of it post that. And I think that there's, you know, for a company to be able to pivot, I mean, BlackBerry and Kodak were never meant to solve the problems that Apple does, right? Like, and like they hadn't come up with or even thought of the problems that consumers were having that Apple then came and solved, because Apple was thinking next generation. Apple was already like on the next problem. What's the future problem? What's the vision of the problems we're going to be solving 10, 20, 30 years from now? And Steve Jobs came up with all this stuff and everyone was like, that's ridiculous. Like no one's having those problems. What problems are you even trying to solve? Those don't exist. And Steve Jobs stuck to his guns and moved forward. And I think with lots of different innovations, like if you look at the story of Dropbox, or you look at the story of like Shazam, which is, you know, a music app, the music app that like tells you, like that was conceived when Nokia was a thing, like pre-smartphones. The whole story of Shazam is that like the founder, you know, was actually having CDs ripped onto like a database where you would then dial with your Nokia phone. But he came up with an idea that was so innovative and so ahead of its time that now it's the most downloaded app in the whole world. But it like, he couldn't have imagined that the App Store would be a thing. So there's kind of like this level of innovation where it's like, can you even really know? You know, it's like people who are thinking that way, they're solving the problems that are 10, 20 years in the future, but they're also just so certain that it's almost like there will be a way where those ideas match up or match together. So I think there's a question of that as well in the innovation space, which is like, are you going to know if you have like the top groundbreaking idea? The only thing you can really do, rather than always asking customers what they want, there's a level of that in order to run a successful business. But in order to make a successful innovation, there seems to be more of a level of like watching the data and just seeing how things come together and being able to think strategically. Like Andre, I think you were referring to like, it's difficult when you're in the team to see the strategy level, right? If you're like in a product team to actually like see the larger global strategy level. But that's kind of the bouncing that you have to do in the product space to even be moving far enough ahead to solve the problems of the future before they even get here.
I remember,
the App Store. You guys don't forget the App Store. That was a revolution. It was a new business model back in the day, and that completely destroyed the competition, because with micropayments, I could have access to software. Before that, I don't know if you guys remember, but to buy a piece of software, it was 1,000 euros or dollars, US dollars. It was really expensive. So the App Store now is very easy to explain. But before the App Store, nobody could think of the App Store. This sounds stupid, right? But it's true. So Steve Jobs brought the App Store, plus very expensive phones. So I can imagine their revenue streams going big after day one. Okay, App Store, download. So it was very hard because BlackBerry is competing on the hardware, on the operating system. And that guy brought the App Store as well. This is one of the things that the executive from BlackBerry shared with us 1 year ago at Adobe. He was talking about business model innovation. It wasn't part of our radar. Our radar was R&D, develop a better hardware, blah, blah, blah. And also, I think he talked about 3G. The fact that their operating system and hardware was designed for a slower internet, and then suddenly mobile internet was fast, and they weren't able to cope with that and to come up with better solutions. The other thing, just reading my notes, he talked about was everybody was saying, oh, nobody will use a phone with their finger. And Steve Jobs said, they will learn. And this is beautiful because everybody is now a fan of design thinking. And design thinking is one of many methods to innovate. And design thinking is good and bad. Bad because it starts with the customer. They ask the customer, the empathy phase, right? Steve Jobs is another type of innovation. It's a push type of innovation. They will learn how to use, and he was right. I rest my case.
Someone mentioned at some point, right, that BlackBerry, their customers were executives primarily, right? And I think that the iPhones were not targeting executives. They were targeting like many more people, I would say. But also what that reminds me of is I'm also too young to have owned a BlackBerry, but I do remember prior to iPhones where I had an iPod and a cell phone, and I wanted those to be the same thing. So I didn't have two chargers, the two things I needed to charge, right? And I remember that. I remember feeling that way, frustrated that I had to charge two things, right? And I remember having that problem. And I wonder if BlackBerry was blind to that because they were focused on executives that may not have had that problem, right?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. I think you nailed it. I actually was taking notes when Kat was talking, and you know, they were building for the new generation. But you know, it happens that Apple had the iPod, right? And iPod, of course, was very appealing to a younger generation, to, you know, what would now be millennials. So kids, 19, 20, 20 something, they were having the iPod. So they had the data to understand, okay, you know, there's people like Ben that now have an iPod, and what is the obvious thing that Ben is asking? Well, they don't want to have two devices. They don't want to get the iPod and then have another phone. And that was the discussion that was going on inside Apple as well, since at least 2003 or 2004. So going back to what Hugo said regarding the touch screen, there's this very interesting book by Ken Kiosenda. You might have read it. Ken Kiosenda is the developer of the touch screen in Apple, and he was leading the development team of the touch screen that was asked by Steve Jobs to, you know, to design the touch screen to a new product that was a secret product at the time. So I think he spent the first 1 year or so developing the touch screen without knowing to what kind of device he was going to be actually working on. And one of the things that he says in his book, which I don't remember the title right now, but I will share it with you in a couple of minutes, is that you know, the very first iterations of the touch screen were really almost they were going to a deadlock inside Apple. They were almost about to give up because at that point they thought this is not going to work out. And then they had this breakthrough when they started using Markov chains to correct text. Because what happens in the touch screen, this is a technicality, but this is the technicality that is the disruptive thing behind the touch screen, the keyboard, is that there's only a small percentage chance that you're actually hitting the right key. Mm-hmm. But even today, right? But back then it was the same. So they were self-correcting without you even realize. So every time you type on the touch screen, it's self-correcting, and that was the breakthrough that allowed for touch screen. And then
it makes me laugh because it really makes me laugh because, like what you said, Hugo, right? Like Steve Jobs is like, they will learn, right? Not only will they learn, but man, are there endless website after website of autocorrect like failures, right? Like that's probably still a thing today. And yet it still has been a sticky technology. And I find that really funny.
Yeah, people optimize for convenience, right?
Wasn't it a case, let's say a traditional case of we are too big to fail, we are making a lot of money. Let me give you an example. I've had a lunch today with the ventures director, or the equivalent to an innovation director of a large Portuguese group. Turnover is 1.5 Bs a year, which is really big in Europe, big in Portugal in particular. And he was like, you know what the problem is? There's no need to innovate. Yeah, the CEO wants to innovate, but he talks about, but what's the why? There's no burning platform. Mm-hmm. And the question is, when an organization thinks there's no need to innovate, that's the problem, because I'm famous now, we are making a lot of money, our superpower is really valuable. But isn't that going to change one of these days? Is it sustainable to allow CEOs to have this strategy? Because they will probably destroy jobs in the future. So my question is, what do we need to change in the corporation, in the corporate innovation worlds, to evangelize so many board of directors out there for the need to innovate continuously, to come up with more radical bets, disruptive bets, to avoid case studies like BlackBerry? Or is it avoidable at all?
My point, I tend to put the responsibility always on the top leader. If you choose a CEO that is not a visionary, you're in deep problems. Let's just say that you can see the old type of management, for example, from Blockbuster that was gigantic, and you see on the other side another contrast of a gigantic company that had to change or it would die, like Microsoft, and they changed completely in like 6 years. They changed from a company with closed software, very protective of everything they had, to a community shareable cloud company, innovative with the HoloLens and lots of new technologies. And that was the consequence of good leadership. Because if your leader, and I've been in many of those positions, if your board does not believe, like the person you've talked to from that company, that innovation is the way, and they should at least, they have a very good business model, they're making money, good for them, but they need a complementary, an alternative business model for them to make money in the future, and they have nothing to lose if they work on it from the start, you know. But that all comes to board willpower. If you don't have that sponsorship, no innovation director, head of IT, CIO, CTO, they won't go anywhere. That's my understanding. Sorry for the bluntness.
Oh, that's it. I think one of the things that I've realized at Caterpillar, because I've had a couple of projects go this way, is that, boy, innovation comes to a screeching halt once it threatens an existing profitable business, right? And it's less clear to me in the BlackBerry case, but boy, it's crystal clear in the Kodak case. That film business was incredibly profitable for them, right? And so I don't think it's like I don't think it's as much like they didn't see digital cameras coming. I think they even invented the digital camera in their R&D group, right?
They did.
So it's like, it's not that they didn't see it coming. It's like they did not succeed at convincing their leaders that this profitable business is not lasting, and something else is coming up. And that, I think, is like the crux of it. It comes down to money, unfortunately.
And also shareholder interest, you know, because a company is making money. Let's imagine you have a company with awesome revenue and it's raising like 10% every year. And the shareholders are very happy. Let's get dividends or let's get results. So every year they're expecting, let's imagine, $20 million or euros every year. And then one year someone comes along, like a head of innovation or a CIO or someone else, and says, oh, let's invest 5 million to innovate. Yeah, this year, instead of getting 20 million, you'll get 15. And then next year, instead of getting 20 million, you'll probably get 25. You know, think about the future. And they will always say, no, man, I was really expecting those 20 million. I have some bills to pay, other companies to support. So forget about it. Yeah, 20 million a year is fine. Mm-hmm. Shareholder value also clashes with the innovation principles as well. You know, it's money that comes out of the investor's pocket.
It's all about short-term gains, right? Not the long.
True.
Yeah, and in the case of BlackBerry, some people don't know this, but they were making lots of money on email, because if you remember that in the day, if you were a company and you wanted to have employees using BlackBerry, you had to buy the server and the licenses.
Yeah.
So they were making, and even Vodafones and so on, they had to have the BlackBerry servers inside their racks, inside Vodafone or inside other telecom companies, and they were making. They had the revenue share fee, so they were making up to 10% on each. They were making $10 out of each client per month. That's how much they were doing. So the Vodafone will charge them like €50 to have the BlackBerry, and they would say, we want $10 per client. So if anyone is saying, oh, let's change our business model, or let's try to have something like apps or something, this was such a sweet deal that they were totally, for everyone. And the telecom companies were not super happy. So that's also one of the reasons of the demise. So the moment, the first years, they were super excited, right? Because they saw the growth. But then as they had millions of BlackBerries and they were paying hundreds of millions of US dollars to BlackBerry just because the license were there, they were not so happy. So when competitors came along, Vodafone said, the BlackBerry deal is super expensive for us. So the moment we can run away from this, they did, and that's also one of the reasons the business model innovation.
Again, the business model, not just the technology breakthrough of the touchscreen, not just the App Store as a business model and a technology breakthrough.
Yeah, like someone said, at the end of the day, money is still a very important driver, right?
Oh, true. And when BlackBerry was removed from their organization where I was in the past, the first nail in their coffin was the high five-figure fee that we paid just to have the server in our infrastructure. And besides that, you had all the extra data that we had to pay for the telecom operators, and then the complexity on your ecosystem, applicational ecosystem, because when you had trouble with email, you never knew if it was your Outlook or the BlackBerry server or the telecom provider or the network. So it was a nice revenue stream, but then their demise as well.
I also think a tough part is like the expertise of the people that you have at the company, right? When you're like BlackBerry, I don't know for sure, but I bet BlackBerry had a ton of hardware people, had a ton of, a lot fewer like software or especially like App Store ecosystem people. And like, it's not easy to just like change all the people in your company, right?
Completely right. It's as André mentioned. It was a legacy platform. It wasn't a very smart operating system. It was really old school, and they worked hard to maintain it. And when they had severe bugs, and they did, and security breaches, and they did, it also tainted their. You remember that, right? They had a huge security breach, and it was also it damaged severely their reputation.
That was behind the whole Obama thing, was security. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Totally right. They had a very hardware focused company. They also had good software people, but so the inventor of the BlackBerry messaging, which was WhatsApp 15 years ago,
BIM,
better than WhatsApp, right?
Right.
And that guy, he did it on his he did it as a side project inside BlackBerry. Then he showed it up to the management, that he said, this is great, but this is going to take money away from email, because we cannot, sell email licenses if people are just chatting to each other. And this was born inside. So again, the codec story, right? Some engineer goes there, I have here, it's a digital machine. Oh, no, this is going to take money away from camera films and so on. Eventually, this guy ended up making it, going into the business line. But again, it was really not a software-minded company.
I also remember there was a Freakonomics episode or something. They were talking about Netflix, right? And one of the things that makes Netflix, I'll say, different from a lot of companies is they say if you work at Netflix, we don't treat you like a family member. We treat you like a professional sports player, right? And it's like, if it's time for you to go, it's time for you to go. And they had no problem like firing people and bringing in new people. And it was a really I don't think that environment was for everybody, but it also was kind of the opposite, right? Where they wanted to respond, like if one area of their company became obsolete, they wanted to be able to quickly change that over, I think.
Yeah, many of these companies have, sometimes the modern companies have very toxic environments. One, they are very competitive. Just to get in, it's very competitive. When you're in, you're in an environment with a lot of people that are really smart. Most of them definitely smarter than you. And I have an episode when I was visiting. I had the good fortune of visiting Google in Paris. And I don't know, the tour guide she was in a bad day. She was having a bad day. You could see it in her eyes. And, and when she was walking us through the facilities, she said, okay, these are the regular people. And that section is the developer section. We can't go through there. They don't like it. It was really funny. And then she said, oh, and here, because someone asked, okay, you have that rule where someone can dedicate like 10% of their time to a personal project. And she turns to 20%, they say, and she says, yeah, it's 20%, but it's after your 100% for Google. So it's 120%. So, so it's
like I feel very much the American capitalism when they say you can have as much vacation as you want, but we're going to measure you based on your results, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah, it's a good example. But coming back to Netflix, once again, Netflix blockbuster thing, it's once again like Netflix offer themselves to Blockbuster twice. They even Reed Hastings, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he visited Blockbuster headquarters. He went there and visited them in the southern USA, and he was laughed at when he suggested to the board of directors of Blockbuster that they wanted to be their digital channel. It's let us just be your digital channel. You have physical stores, we'll take care of your digital. And he got laughed at. He left. It was the second time they had the chance to buy them for, I believe, 800 million or so, or 500. What a bargain! And they said,
it's still not just going back to BlackBerry. I think the problem still exists. It's a good case study because I think it's the same problem. It's still the same problem everywhere, because every single dollar or euro or pound that we put in a more radical or disruptive breakthrough innovation is money that will not go to the pocket of the owner or the shareholder. And there's high uncertainty and risk. Going back to my lunch, imagine a family-owned company, large group. If they put money in more radical ideas where the probability to succeed is less than 1%, they will be like, why don't I put this money on my bank account? So why am I going to put the money here if you can't tell me what's the return on investment? Because ROI is still the technique to decide where to put the money in large organizations. Probably because of a reason, because 99% of board directors went through an MBA. And during the MBA, they don't talk about innovation in the proper way. This is my thesis. So they don't consider the future-proofing the organization, having a portfolio of different bets in different horizons. And they still think that innovation is technology innovation. They don't talk about business model innovation. They don't have practice and knowledge on how to ideate regarding new business models. That's why this is still a problem, and it's going to happen over and over again. It's still here in many board leaders. That's why Alexander Westerwalder, I think I said this before, he is recommending to have a CEO that takes care of the fiscal year. That's fine, business as usual, the cash cow. And the chief entrepreneurship officer that takes care about tomorrow and beyond. And that person is responsible to find the next business.
Yeah,
true. But it's, as Ben said, it's a short-term perspective. It's like fill your pocket now instead of future-proofing.
Just going to what Tu was saying. So inside BlackBerry, they had a quite interesting structure, because Jim Balsillie was the CEO and Mike Lazaridis, he was the actual founder of the company. And he also had lots of power inside the company. He was the founder of the company, he was the actual CTO. They had very two different perspectives. Mike was the hardware guy. He came from the legacy world of 1G and 2G. So for him, it was about low bandwidth optimization and making email very efficient. Jim, on the other hand, at least crediting the sources that Sean Silkoff had in the book, which are primary sources, and I guess he spoke with Jim Balsillie lots of times. He was saying, "Oh, we have to become a software company." So how do you guys see the clash? Because if you have two CEOs, Hugo, and one is taking care of the fiscal year, the other one is taking care of innovation or inside entrepreneurship or whatever you want to call it. These guys, they will clash, and this happened in BlackBerry. Mike started to clash with Jim, and they didn't speak to each other, so they were not best friends as in pals, but they had a good communication. And when things started to go south, they simply split. They stayed in the company together for a few years, but they were not talking to each other anymore. And of course, that compounded the problems that BlackBerry had. So how are you going to maintain this communication between innovation and the necessity to keep business as usual? In your perspective, do you have any take on that?
There are many theories on how to do that, but I don't think there's a one size fits all. It depends on who the leader is, how he understands the need and the why in particular. Because even talking with a few innovation directors during my day, when I ask the why, many can tell me the why. They have a mandate to innovate, but what's the reason why? They don't have the why, and without the why, is it sustainable? Is the culture ready to think about the future? And there was a speaker here at the Innovation Cafe that said one thing that I will never forget. Many companies will certainly fail. The business model will certainly decline. That's it. But accepting that is not a reality. But that changes the perspective. When someone is like, okay, let's kill that product in 3 years' time. And that's common in software houses, but it's not common in the other type of organizations. They don't plan for that decline. So it declines when there's a startup, someone that challenges. But I don't have the answer to your question. It depends on who the leader is, what type of organization it is.
Well, from past experience, I've seen a scenario in which there was one CEO that said, okay, 90% of our revenue comes from this single source. And this single source, from my understanding, can have problems in the future. What will happen to us if that happens? And that drove the idea of a new parallel business model, even if they still had this cash cow. So that was one of the driver. But one execution mistake is that putting that in the same P&L, having not removing this innovation unit and this new business model to a separate side and give it the proper funding and dedicated people and so on was an error of execution. But that person saw that dependency on one single source of revenue was a bad idea. Not always the vision comes
back to the ROI thing though. I mean, it is also like incredibly difficult when the new disruptive situation is a lot less profitable, right? Like how are you going to convince people that, unless it actually happens, that we've got to invest in this lower profitable thing to replace our higher profitable thing? It's hard.
And that won't happen, because on established businesses, on corporate structures, if you don't justify that this will make you money in at least 3 years, let's imagine, if the return on investment is not less than 3 years, they won't even pursue it. Yeah. You can see startups doing it, and André knows it well. They still don't know how the business model will work, but it's a good idea. People believe on it, and you'll start building the product. The product market fit is key, but it will come along. On corporate, that won't happen. If the board doesn't see that product market fit, and you don't explain to them that the numbers will come, and they will be a source of a considerable source of revenue, they will kill it from the start. It won't even be born.
The famous model to solve the problem is the McKinsey 3 horizons model, where there's an horizon 1 of the incremental innovation. There's a way to budget that type of projects. The horizon 1 is what we do every single day in a traditional organization. Horizon 2 is what consultants usually recommend: targeted new market or extend your capability. Horizon 3 is venture capital to sponsor a startup because the idea is too disruptive to do it internally. But the latest update from I forgot Steve Blank. I think it was Steve Blank that wrote an article. I just pasted the link here. Is even the 3 Horizons model is old. Okay. The point is the organization needs to become innovative. So it's about a leadership that understands the need for different types of innovation that will shape a culture that will empower everybody to innovate continuously, and the ecosystem as well, because ecosystem is the new theory around innovation. Before it was innovation management, innovation strategy. Now it's the ecosystem of partners, okay, that will help your organization to become future proof. I've pasted the article here, so maybe this helps to solve the problem that André asked.
I also
Thanks,
think
Hugo.
that I've had success talking not to our executive office, but at Caterpillar, but like my boss and his boss and their boss. If you focus on the problem, right, and like make them like really feel the problem that you're trying to solve, that can really motivate people to make decisions. It's not 100%. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but if you can put the bad taste in the mouth of your leaders, like, look at what we're making our customers do right now, right? Like this is ugly. Then that can really motivate people.
Yeah, definitely. Starting from the pain is a very good idea. Yeah. It's very easy to explain. Yeah.
I think my,
okay, one last question. We are running out of time.
I was just going to add a comment on this focus on the problem, not the solution. I think it was the Waze founder that came up with that idea. Yuri Levin, I think his name was. You think about Tesla's predecessor, the GM launched the EV1, and it was a car they created where they said, hey, this is a great car. It's got low drag, but it looked goofy and nobody liked it. And it had a lead battery, and they sort of did everything wrong. But they did have a huge following. And what did Tesla do, right? They said, what do people want? They want to solve a problem, which is have a non-fossil fuel car that looks cool, and they don't have to give up all these luxury elements. I couldn't agree with you more, Hugo, on the cultural element. I would add one wrinkle to it. You can tell people we want to innovate all you want, but until you create it, you use the word empower, which I think is important, until you create that safe environment where people feel they can take that risk, because just like investors, you're taking a risk as an employee, right? Someone mentioned US capitalism earlier. You know, US capitalism has taught people to be afraid, right? If change is coming, you're probably getting a pay cut, losing your job, you know, right? So safety is such a big element of it. And that doesn't happen without trust. And so there's a huge cultural element here as well.
Is that connected with the rewarding incentive system?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think as a leader, think about, I think a company, and I think Eloy sort of alluded to this, but think about it from modern portfolio theory, right? You've got, as an investor, you own large caps, small caps, mid caps, right? Maybe micro. I think this sort of innovation space is your micro cap idea. You're going to allocate something to it, but make sure it doesn't run amok, right? That's what people are worried about. We're going to throw money down this hole and go nowhere. Well, if it's only 1% of your revenue, you can probably survive it.
Yeah.
All right.
Earnings.
Ben, do you want to share key takeaways from your notes? This wasn't planned, but you are taking notes.
Well, my first one I already took a picture of and erased, so it might not be worth going back that far. But I thought it was interesting that like the beginnings of BlackBerry were probably still are a better user experience than touchscreen keyboard innovation today, and that comes back to the sort of the push versus the pull innovation of the iPhone, and I just found that pretty fascinating. What else we got here that's of note? I really like the companies fail for the same reason that made them great, right? Because that's like, that to me is that challenging old profitability that's going to die someday, right? Like that is like a truly innovative company who can do that well. And then what I've got written here, right? Yeah, threatening profitability, different users again, right? So make sure that you know who your users are, because they probably have different problems that you can solve. And so if you're too focused on company executives, you know, Apple could come in and make everybody else happy, or younger people maybe. The ecosystem was huge, right? I think a big miss with the BlackBerry OS was the ecosystem. That's like an old get big fast thing to me, right? Where you've got to, because I remember paying for apps with my iPhone and not wanting to switch to an Android because I'd have to pay for the same apps again. And so those switching costs are real. And then, yeah, again, the pull versus push innovation system. And I put a little spot for the ecosystem, even though it deserves, I think, more space than that. But is that pretty good?
All right. It's so good to
As
have
always.
you here, Ben. As always, yeah. All right. I think we need to say thank you or obrigado to André. It was a pleasure to learn from you. And thank you all. And next week, please be here. I think it's going to be on a different day. Let me check. God, too many tabs are open on my laptop. Yeah, it's going to be in the 5th of November at 3 p.m. London time. And our guest is the head of innovation at Airbus. So come here and ask the future of aviation. I think it's going to be cool.
He's probably not in a good mood, though.
No, he is, in particular because I think he was born in Brazil, so the Brazilians.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Boeing guy is not in such a good mood.
Yeah, really tough year for aviation.
We'll see how motivated I am to take notes next week. I think it depends on how this election goes. So
we hope to see you here.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
All right, guys. Thank you all.
Cheers.
Okay, guys. Thanks for being here today.
Bye-bye.
Hugo, and
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Obrigado, André. Ciao.
Ciao.